saw the best Hail Mary pass of my life. Jaden Daniels was running around the backfield like crazy. The Chicago Bears were trying to get him, and he threw the longest pass. That pass must have been 70 yards, and it got tipped and went right into the hands of the Commanders receiver. And man, all of a sudden, Jaden Daniels is playing like a legend. It's kind of interesting because a lot of people might not know this, but he started his college career with my Arizona State Sun Devils. But because we had Coach Herm Edwards, and Coach Herm Edwards was not the greatest coach, to be honest with you, at least not offensively, I don't think we really got to see how great Jaden Daniels could be. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't know. He's real frail. And he's gonna really, every time he got hit in college, at least at ASU, he had this look on his face like he was about to die. Now, don't get me wrong, he could definitely bulk up, and he probably has. But man, I never knew he had such an arm. It looked like he threw that bad boy 70 yards. Speaking of sports, last night I was watching the Dodgers, and it seemed like every time I looked up, they were hitting a home run off of the Yankees pitching staff. And then at the end of the game, the Yankees made a little bit of a run in the final inning, and it really ended up being a great game. This is that time of year when you can kind of zone off into sports, and I absolutely love it. If you're a sports fan, let me know. And sports is exactly why I wanted to speak with you today on our walk. I noticed when I was watching the baseball game last night that it seemed like 1 out of every 2 people at the stadium was a female. I think girls actually love sports, but they want sports to be super interesting. Because just like anybody else, if you're watching a movie, you don't want to watch a movie just because it's a movie. You want it to be interesting. And there's one game in town that we think has a lot of potential, but for some reason it's just not quite there yet. I found out that the WNBA lost $40 million this past season. And believe it or not, that was considered good news because apparently they were expected to lose $50 million. And a lot of people would say that that's the Caitlyn Clark effect. If you don't know who Caitlyn Clark is, you might want to Google or YouTube her because she's basically a really outstanding player. She looks a lot like the girl next door, but she's really, really talented at playing. And a lot of the women in the WNBA are talented. Here's the problem. 60% of the WNBA is owned by the NBA. So that big bad owner of the NBA team that everybody thinks is this rich tyrant, right? Not all of them, but some people think that way, right? They've actually been losing money hand over fist with the WNBA league for a long time. So a lot of times you'll watch videos where the WNBA players kind of complain that when it comes to getting paid, they don't get paid nearly as much as the NBA players. And it's true, but you know, if you're in a league that's losing $40 or $50 million annually, it's kind of hard for people to want to validate giving you guys a raise. But it doesn't mean that you don't deserve it. So I've told you guys in the past that they ought to lower the rim because with dunks it creates more excitement. But I never really had any numbers to back it up, but I think I do now. There's one thing that I never paid attention to in women's basketball that I actually found out by talking to my buddy ChatGPT. What ChatGPT told me was that basically the NBA averages 112 points per game, right? And the WNBA only averages 80. That means that at any given point when you look up the score on the ladies team, it's going to usually be 80 points or less, which means if it's halfway through the first half, you're probably going to see numbers in the 30s, right? And even if it's late into the fourth quarter, you're probably going to see scores in the 60s. Now, here's where I had a little confusion and I was in the wrong. I was thinking that it was the same length of time per game. In other words, with the men's game, it's 4 12-minute periods, right? Quarters. So what you have is a 48-minute game. Did you guys know with the women's game, it's only 40 minutes? I mean, I have a feeling once upon a time when the league was brand new 30 years ago, I think I knew the difference, but I think I kind of forgot about it over the last couple of decades because I just don't watch women's basketball very often. And when I do, it's usually to see if Caitlyn Clark's on TV because I like watching her because she's entertaining. And it just got me thinking, if the women's players actually played a full 12-minute game, you would probably have scores that were in the 100s. And for whatever reason, we love watching points being put through the hoop. So when I think about thinking outside of the box, what we ought to do is we ought to go ahead and extend the women's game. So instead of 4 10-minute quarters, it's 12-minute quarters. By giving them that extra 8 minutes, you're literally going to create a situation where they're able to actually score a lot more points. So naturally, that got me thinking about the dunk again. If the girls score basically the same amount of points per minute as the men do, and believe it or not, they do, I asked ChatGPT, I said, hey, what's the average shooting percentage for an NBA player versus WNBA player? I thought that I was going to hear a situation where the men's average was maybe 47 or 48%, and the women's would be like 38 or 39%. That's what I thought I was going to hear. But apparently the average NBA player shoots 46%, and the average WNBA player shoots 44%. So if you kind of add up the fact that they're playing a shorter game and they shoot about the same, that means that the only difference between the two teams, since they're scoring the same per minute, is the dunk. That's the only difference between losing $40 million a season or making billions of dollars a year like the men's team does. So how can we change this? Because the NBA owners really don't like the idea of just losing $40 million a year, and I don't think any of us would. The reason they do it is because we don't want to just dissolve the females league. Now, the WNBA has some things that are really going for it. If I told you that this past year, the average attendance was 9,800 people per game, you would probably say, well, yeah, but that arena holds close to 20,000 people, so that's an empty-ass arena. But the reality is, the year before last, they only averaged 6,600 people per game. When you go from 6,600 to 9,800, I'm going to give you credit for doing a kick-ass job at raising that attendance. And you might say to yourself, well, that's because of Caitlyn Clark. But that would make sense at Caitlyn Clark games. Hi, girls. How are you guys doing? But that would make sense at Caitlyn Clark games. That wouldn't make sense at other arenas where Caitlyn Clark's not playing that day. So does she increase people viewing on TV? Sure. And do her games get people to probably come close to selling out? I don't know, but I'm guessing probably. But for them to go from 6,600 to 9,800 people in each game, that's a huge accomplishment. So they're obviously going in the right direction. So let's think outside of the box when we go back to this situation with the dunk. The only difference, guys, between the men's and the women's league is the dunk. When a woman's growing up playing basketball, she looks at that rim and never thinks about dunking, unless she's a 7-footer. But again, you don't know when you're little that you're going to be a 7-footer, right? So they predominantly look at that game and they think, I'm going to always have a game that's connected to the floor. Men, on the other hand, some of them can start dunking as soon as 7th or 8th grade, and occasionally you'll hear a story about a 5th or 6th grader dunking, right? We've all heard these crazy stories before. And they're not so crazy when you hear about them all the time. So they're always thinking above the rim, and the pros are above the rim, so they know it's a reality. So what if we did this? What if during the summer leagues, what if we actually experimented not with going from a 10-foot hoop to a 9-foot hoop? And the reason I say is because, yes, it would create dunks, but your game would be destroyed on the 10-foot hoop. But what if we just brought it down 6 inches? And I'll use a comparison with the men. If you were to up the men's hoop from 10 feet to 10'6", you would probably eliminate about 15% of the players that can dunk now, like the shorter point guards. They probably wouldn't be able to dunk if it was 10'6". Conversely, with the women, if you lower it down that 6 inches, you're probably going to make it where instead of 5% of the players being able to dunk like it is now, you would probably up that to 25% of the players. And because you're only changing the height 6 inches rather than a full 12 inches, a full foot, hopefully you wouldn't affect people's shooting percentages too horribly. So imagine a Caitlyn Clark that can dribble and shoot just like Steph Curry, but imagine her coming down on a break and actually being able to dunk. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is how you can make the WNBA compete with the NBA. Immediately change those 10-minute quarters to 12, because I don't know about you, but I wish the NBA was 15-minute quarters. Basketball is fun to watch. And if it was that extra 3 minutes, oh my goodness, you wouldn't mind those players getting paid so much. So if you guys agree with me and you think the WNBA should do some obvious moves, those would be the obvious moves they should make. Expand that game out to 48 minutes. That's going to equate where you get triple-digit games a heck of a lot more often. Lower that hoop, but do it during exhibition games, and maybe even you can have an in-season tournament situation where you lower that hoop. I think what would happen is shooting percentages would go up, so they would probably equate to the 46% that the men have, and you'd probably get a situation where every quarter somebody would be dunking, rather than now where every time there's a dunk it's really kind of a layup, right, that they give them credit for. And so that's my thoughts. Here's the downside. All of a sudden people are shooting great at the 9'6" hoop, then they go back to the regulation size and they can't shoot worth a crap anymore. That could potentially happen, but here's what I'm thinking. The goal would be to go down to 9'6". It wouldn't be to stay at 10 feet. The only thing is it would take potential stars that we have now, like Caitlyn Clark and like everybody that's in the league, and it would put them in a real pickle, because imagine if you were good at the game as it is now, and with the shorter hoop, imagine if you no longer were top tier. So there are some pros and there are some cons to it, but right now we have a league that every year for the past 30 years has just bled money. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if it's really good to keep going with this. At the same time, I'm just really starting to enjoy the game because the players are progressively getting more and more talented. And we live in a copycat world. So now, just like every boy wants to be Michael Jordan and LeBron James and Luka Doncic, every girl's going to want to be like Caitlyn Clark and Angel Reese, or whoever the girl's name is. I think it's Angel Reese. If you guys think I'm crazy, let me know. Jesse? Yeah, Bob? This is just you being a jerk again. Bob, I'm actually a nice person. I watch some of the videos that I'm making. It sounds like I'm angry, right? But the reality is, I'm one of these guys that I always try to tell myself, Jesse, there's 330 million people in America. There's 7 or 8 billion people on the planet. If they have a video camera everywhere, they're always going to be able to show you something that's bad news, and there's always plenty of bad news to go around. What you have to remember is that whenever you have that many people anywhere, that's going to happen mathematically whether you like it or not. So again, the world is predominantly good, no matter how many times I tell you this world we live in sucks. This world doesn't suck by any means. Sometimes we wake up on the wrong side of the bed and it appears to suck. But that's why you get out here and you walk and you start to feel better and you start to come up with ideas. Here's the problem. I'm the little guy with a small little YouTube channel. The people that should be thinking like I am are the NBA owners of these franchises. I mean, what is the point of being hard-headed and just keeping up the hoop where it is when you could easily try to see if it's something that the players are talented enough to work with. I mean, are you telling me that these WNBA players would no longer be good if the hoop went down 6 inches? I think they would be better than ever. These women, can already dribble like crazy. They can already shoot okay, but they're missing that dunking element. And here's the thing, I'm old enough to appreciate a game where there's no dunks at all, but most people aren't like that. Most people really love that aspect of basketball. Here's the thing, with the men's game, sometimes it can go overboard, right? You watch some games and you feel like, God, all it is dunks. I want to see some mid-range shooting. I want to see some guys that can not only dunk the ball, but I want to see somebody that can hit a free throw. And those are fundamentals that they're already good at when it comes to the WNBA game. They shoot free throws pretty decently. Again, it seems like across the board, a lot of their percentages are just 1 or 2 points below the men's game. So my thinking is, why don't we just bring it out during an exhibition or a summer league and see what happens? And be honest with me, if you guys could let me know, if all of a sudden you were watching a woman's game and they started doing some alley-oop dunks and stuff, how jazzed would that make you? That would get me so jazzed, I would all of a sudden say, hey, when the WNBA's on, I'm no longer going to look for a sitcom or a YouTube video. I'm going to watch some girls basketball. And I'm telling you guys, over the past decade or two, I started watching the ladies Sun Devils softball team. And I'm telling you, I don't think that softball has an iffy chance. I think there's going to come a time in the future where women's softball literally becomes almost as popular as the men's game of baseball, because there's no way you could tell me that watching Oklahoma Sooners lady softball isn't exciting. Same with UCLA, same with ASU and U of A. I'm telling you, when your team is good, it gives you an idea of what the sport can be like. So again, I'm thinking there's a lot of potential for female athletics going forward. I just think what's really holding the girls' basketball game back is they're trying to compete with this hoop that, if you compare it to men's basketball, it would be like the men playing with an 11-foot hoop. So picture that. You'd have a situation where 1 or 2 people could dunk with regularity and pretty much everyone else would quit trying. That's what's so crappy. A lot of times the best dunks are the ones where they almost dunked it, but it ended up hitting off the backboard and going 1,000,000 feet into the stands. I love watching basketball. The problem is I only like watching the men's game. I want to get to the point where I can enjoy the female game just as much. And by the way, the reason people like gambling so much, and you can ask them, this is a true story. You could take the most boring football teams, you could take the most boring sport, period, and a gambler will watch every minute of it with pure intent, because if they have money on the game, there's just something magical that happens. You end up loving the game. And that goes for office pools too. I used to work at a place where we would have a weekly football pool, right? So you're watching Monday night football, you're watching Thursday night football, and you're watching the whole games. You're checking every score, because we would put $5 in, and we had like 20 or so people that were playing. So every week you could win $100. Did you need the $100? Was it life or death? No. But if all of a sudden you can win $100, you're going to be watching that last game on Sunday evening, which, by the way, I'm walking towards right now. You know, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you guys to join me on this walk. That game isn't going to start for a little while. And I know you might be thinking, Jesse, it's Sunday for you, but it's Monday for me. Well, you know what that means, guys? It means you still got Monday night football, so same deal. Go take a little walk before the game. I think that the key to what I'm telling you guys is that whether it's finding a way to make a league more exciting, whether it's finding a way to become better at your job, whether it's finding a way to lose a couple more pounds because maybe you've plateaued, There's so many things that can pop up into your head when you're constantly taking walks. I know I sound like the drug dealer that's trying to get you addicted to walking, but you want to know something? If walking is a drug, it's the best drug ever. Walking's the only drug that you can really think about that's going to keep you alive forever. It makes your thoughts more clear. I watched a video earlier today that said, if you challenge your brain and you challenge your body, it keeps away things like dementia. So even if you're destined and fated to have dementia, which, let's be honest, boys and girls, if your parents had dementia or Alzheimer's, there's probably a good chance you'll be struck with it too. Why don't we break that chain by walking like crazy? Go get a Sudoku crossword puzzle. Go get a book. Challenge your brain every day. Try to write down 10 or 15 items on a paper and see if you can memorize it. There's a lot of different things that you can do to keep your brain sharp. But one of the things that you need to do is you need to avoid the sugar. You need to try to drink things like water, and you need to be as active as you can. I would love to do push-ups all day long, but after about 25 to 50 of them, I'm okay with waiting till the next day. But with walking, God, I could take 2 or 3 of these half-hour walks every day. I absolutely love them. By the way, would you believe it if I told you it's 92 degrees right now? That's what blows me away about this world that we live in. People are always talking about this global warming, and we've had such a hot year this year, it's hard for me to argue with it anymore. Here's another thing though. Even if you're pro this or pro that, you should always be open to at least hearing the other teams and the other side's story, right? And again, whoever wins this presidency, it's going to change your life in a small way throughout time, but it's not going to really change your life. The way you can change your life is to try to be as healthy as you can, try to live a stress-free life, and try to make good decisions, because the reason decisions matter is I think we've all made poor and bad decisions before, and they have a way of adding stress and misery to us later on. So go for your walk. Dive into your think tank. Think about ways that you can be better today than you were yesterday, and make a plan to be better tomorrow than you are today. If you start with a 15 or 20-minute walk today, why don't we try to set it up where you do that same walk each week or each day, and by this time next week, maybe you could be up to a half-hour walk, right? And all of a sudden, if you start a walking routine, you could probably go the rest of your life and just focus a little bit on what you're eating and focus on your brain and your mind, and you'll probably live a nice long life. A lot of people will tell you that a lot of heart doctors, they really believe in the power of walking. If you really want to have a healthy heart and healthy set of lungs, you got to keep moving. I heard the other day that working a 9 to 5 and sitting down is actually the new cigarettes. Did you hear that? It's the new cigarette addiction. If you're sitting at a desk every day, it's no different than you smoking like a cigarette smoker. Is it you smoking a pack a day? Probably not. Sometimes they say that stuff to scare you. But the reality is, if it's going to lead to you living less longevity-wise, get up and move. There's no reason why you can't take your 15-minute breaks they give you at work and go for a little walk, especially this time of year. It's nice and cold outside. Bundle up in your best, most enjoyable coat that you own. That's the way to do it, guys. I'm not even sure who's playing this Sunday night game, but I'm looking forward to it. If you're one of these folks that doesn't like sports, you probably clicked off this video long ago. But the reality is, sports, it's a great way to get into your hometown, right? You know, sometimes you hear me talk and you think, God, this guy must not like people, period. I actually think very fondly of the people that live out here with me in Phoenix. And I think very fondly of a lot of you guys out there, no matter what state you live in. I just don't like the ways of the world. For some reason, it just seems like the bad guy always wins. So that's what bums me out. But at the same time, I know the reality. You know why people rob other people? Because the people that they're robbing are actually somewhat successful. They're doing things the right way. If people are trying to rob you, it usually means that you're a success. That's a good thing. But what we need to do is we need to get to the point where even the people that are robbing people can change their ways. And if you're a bad person and you hear my voice, you know if you're a bad, undecent human being. Put your shoes on and go for a walk. You can make a change. You don't have to be religious or a follower of Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad to be a better person, right? And if you be a better person, pretty soon you'll start to realize there's a lot of good people out there. So I hope nobody has kind of stereocast me as a guy that hates people, because I don't. And if I do hate anything, it's the fact that a lot of us are capable of being really cool, down-to-earth, reasonable people. But for some reason, our world has a way of pulling us in different directions and making enemies where there is no enemy to be found. And you could say that about every place in the world right now. There's a chance that we're heading into a really tough situation with wars in the future. And some would argue we're already smack dab in the middle of it. But as an individual, I'm going to try to be better than I was today, starting tomorrow. And I want you guys to do the same. So I wish you a wonderful evening, whether you're watching the game or not. I hope you have a nice night. And I hope you wake up tomorrow and have a wonderful day. So I'll see you then. Have a good night.